On this episode of Money and Power, fake Indians, real debt, and Nathan plays hooky. But first, Kid Inc.
The money and the power. Yeah. Once you get a little, they just want to take you down, cuz we've been going hard for too long. Can't get enough, what is you on? Yeah. Really ain't nothing I could drop that. Wake up in the morning, make it all okay. It's nothing to
Welcome to episode 27 of Money and Power, our weekly look at questions related to finance, politics, and culture. Tonight, I, Jeremiah Martin, am your host. And joining me from Michigan, a financial consultant and host of the podcast, Rob Talk Money and Apologetics 105, Rob Johnson.
The intro has never sounded so good.
I stumbled a little bit over there, but
I liked it.
Welcome, Rob. And as you may have heard, Nathan is out for the week, so he's not on this podcast. I am hosting this week, so we brought in a pinch hitter from Cleveland, Ohio, Khalid Namar.
How you doing, guys?
Doing well, and we'll talk more with Khalid in a little bit and introduce him. But Rob, how you been this week?
Good. It was an interesting week. I actually tore the muscle, the bottom of my foot, through a very freak hay wagon accident. So I've been walking with a boot and crutches for the last 4 days or so. So that's been it's been a very good time.
So what I hear you saying is that you got an injury doing one of the most sedentary things you can do, just sitting on a hay wagon.
Yeah, there's more to it.
All right.
Yeah, that's how out of shape I am. I just sat there and I was like, oh, muscle in the bottom of my foot just popped.
It's pretty bad when you're doing nothing and your muscles are like, hey, this is too much.
Yep.
In little inside baseball, we're recording on a Wednesday. Usually we record on a Monday or a Tuesday. We're recording on a Wednesday because I had to call an audible on Monday. My whole family has been sick. At least someone in my family, my wife, or my kids have been sick since last Thursday. It hit us pretty hard with. I don't know what it was. It was kind of a mega flu. It hit us in every possible way. And I won't get into the gruesome details. But it was not fun. And I woke up this morning just feeling like $1,000,000. And I'm so glad that I'm over it. And thankfully all the kids are over it too. So hopefully the show will go off without a hitch. And hopefully no more sickness going through our house.
Yeah, that happened. I was telling you before we went live. That happened earlier this year to my family, and it was just a mess. Like nothing feels clean. Like everything just feels like it's got a bucket of germs on it. It's the worst. It usually takes a week post everyone feeling better before the house feels normal again, at least for us.
Yeah, so I think it was Sunday. We thought we were over it. We thought we'd hit the peak. We're on the downhill, and we cleaned everything. We scrubbed all of the surfaces, cleaned all the toilets. Yep. We washed all of the linens and just everything. We just got everything super clean, and then sure enough, kids waking up in the middle of the night, and it all started all over again. So, yeah. So enough about that. Obviously, with the cooler weather coming, that is probably not the first that we will be hearing of those types of things. But with that being said, and on a much brighter note, I do want to formally introduce our third co-host sitting in the third seat tonight, Khalid Namar. Now, Khalid, I've known Khalid for years now, probably 4 or 5 years now, and we've become good friends, and I'm really glad to have him on the show. But just a little bit about Khalid. Khalid Namar is a co-host of the weekly Todd Allen Show on WFCB Radio. Khalid has studied finance, world affairs and politics for over 20 years. He has traveled to Ireland, the UK, Belgium as a business consultant. He has advised on commercial real estate, financing, and commodities transactions. He is a proud American whose favorite president is Ulysses S. Grant, and he's also the co-founder of the American Trinity Project, a civics education nonprofit based in Cleveland that teaches the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, history, and free market economics. So welcome to the show, Khalid.
Thank you, brother. And just so you know, you and I met back in 2012.
Was it 2012? I was thinking 2013, but
Yeah, did
that's
about 2012. It's been a minute.
hey, time flies when you're having fun, right?
That's right. That's right. It's good to be on. Good to be on. We've been talking about doing this for a while. I'm glad to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got just a jam-packed show for everyone today. A lot of cool topics coming up. But before we got into the kind of the main meat of the show, I did want to pass it to Khalid and kind of tell us a little bit about your world. Tell us what you're working on, and tell us a little bit more about the American Trinity Project.
Yeah, American Trinity Project is my partner, Dan Messina, who came up with this concept. He's one of my closest friends in the world, and he is a liberty-minded, individual. Loves to study the founding documents and principles. He came up to me. We met in 2012. Also, came up and said, "Look, we need to start educating people and changing some minds." This was after the election in 2012. We felt that people just didn't understand what was at stake, what liberty was all about, what the Constitution, what this thing we call America is. And so we said we need to go out and do something about it. So we started this American Trinity Project, which was inspired by Dennis Prager, who has coined the term American Trinity off of our coin, E pluribus unum, in God we trust, and liberty, which is counterweight to race, gender, class, which is taught by people on the other side. So we developed this organization. We go out to schools, colleges, high schools, colleges, and any other groups who want to be educated about the founding, the Constitution. And we also have done classes on free market economics to college kids. We've spoken to college groups about how to form their arguments, how to base their liberty-minded arguments against people they disagree with, how to have civil discourse. And we expose high school kids to the Constitution and letting them know what it is. We walk them through the Bill of Rights, and we get them to understand what this is all about and why this applies to living in a free society, and why it's important not to lose it, but to preserve it, because it is what makes America America.
That's awesome. So I think last time we talked, you had mentioned that here in Ohio, there's laws on the books that require civics education around Constitution Day, September 17th, and you thought that might be kind of an in for you guys to get into public schools and take some of that burden off of public school teachers as that requirement, and you guys would help do some of that training. Did any of that pan out? Were you able to get into some public schools and do some Constitution Day training?
Yes, we did. Not as much as we've liked, but we got into a local college here, and we got into the public school. We did a high school history class. We did a couple of classes downtown, social studies classes on doing Constitution. We like to say Constitution Week, because Constitution Day is not nearly enough. But we spoke. Yeah, so we spoke during that week, and we had a good time with the kids and exposing them to the Bill of Rights and the founding. We did a lot of work early in the year at a couple of high schools, and we walked through the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment to a criminal justice class. We've spoken to kids about the Declaration of Independence, taxes, and how taxes has been a contentious issue throughout history, and it still is. And we tie that to the founding, and we ask, astonishingly, how many people have read the Declaration of Independence? We ask every class. No hands go up. We ask them, how many of you have read the Constitution? No hands go up.
Hmm.
And it's kind of tragic that these kids are sent out here to vote and to be participants in a process that they really don't have a fundamental understanding of. So that's our battle, and that's what we're up against.
Yeah, so we've talked a bunch about this in the past, but one of the things that we talk about on this podcast is being able to have rational discourse, rational, meaningful conversations on issues, even where we disagree, and we really see that being a void right now in our culture, where if you disagree with me or you voted for the other person, then you're automatically evil, or we assume the worst intentions about someone, and we never really sit down at the table and have those conversations. And we want to provide, that platform here on this podcast. And we've had people on this podcast that we disagree with on certain issues. But the goal is to, understand a little bit better the other position and to have that conversation. Because if we can't have that conversation, then, we're in big trouble. But one of the things in talking to you over the past couple years, and this, this project, American Trinity Project, one of the things that probably strikes me most is when you tell me that there are public schools that have, rejected you guys because you guys are deemed as right wing, even though you talk about history and you talk about just the facts of what's going on, and it's the trigger words, if I could say it that way, of saying things like Constitution, Bill of Rights, liberty. These words are like trigger words that automatically paint you as, as a, crazy right wing conservative, and and I wonder if that's not, part of the problem, where we have these trigger words in our kind of cultural lexicon that automatically make us, give assumptions about certain people based on their political ideologies, just based on basic words. Where have we? I guess my question is, how do we fix this when basic words related to our country's founding are deemed as, kind of crazy right-wing ideals, even just talking about the Constitution or, liberty or, God-given rights? How do we move forward when those are, considered trigger words?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, brother. It's a battle because the education of the educators is quite horrendous. I'll give you a couple examples. We were in a class recently where we walked into the class and we see books on the shelf stacked in the classroom, and it's of Howard Zinn's People's History of America. And if you know anything about that, you pretty much know what kind of education these kids are getting if they're reading Howard Zinn. And the media is complicit in this because you read news articles. Anyone that is on our side of the aisle is considered. They use words like, they have to label you a conservative in the article, but anyone else is not labeled. So
Right.
that's considered to be normative. They don't say liberal talk show host or left wing talk show host so and so Don Lemon. They just say talk show host Don Lemon. Anyone else has that right wing or conservative label, and that makes it, uh, abnormal. And the college education that these kids are getting, there was a talk show host who did a program asking parents, how did your kids come back changed from college? And some of the stories were just unbelievable. How they come back with this very arrogant, self-righteous, far-left attitude that what you believe is wrong. One gentleman called in and said he had a copy of Imprimis from Hillsdale in his house, and his kid goes, "What is this doing in my house?" you know, they're coming back possessed from colleges, and so the battle is tough. We just have to do as best we can to get our messages out. Thank God for people like Hillsdale. Thank God for the Young America's Foundation. It's a tough battle because we're up against hundreds and hundreds of universities that have God knows how much money and influence over these kids. and they're teaching them basically to hate their country. And that's what we're up against. And we're just trying to do our little part in getting in front of these kids and giving them a message that they just haven't heard. And so it's a tough battle.
Very good.
That's really interesting because I know a lot of people, because schools is a market that I'm working on breaking into right now with my financial consulting, and so far the pushback that I've received is more so of, it's obviously financial compared to government, but the issue is that they really want to focus on colleges setting the tone for financial planning for college students, which is obviously very dangerous because the college's main priority is revenue, which student loans would be the chief of most options for students. So it's interesting to see how that plays out in several different climates across the board, from government to politics to finance.
Speaking of what Jeremiah mentioned earlier about us being rejected, it's we have gone to schools. I went to one school in Cleveland, spoke to the engagement officer twice, spoke to the assistant principal. They were all set for us to come in. Okay, these guys want to start. And then crickets. They just dropped off the face of the earth. So I emailed them again after like a month. Wow. I got nothing back. So I basically realized they Googled us. And decided we weren't, because their theme of the school is social justice. The guy even told me that. So I knew once he found out about us, he knew we were not on the social justice train, and but he dropped off the planet. And we had the same thing happen with the city club, But you know what? That's going to happen. But we also have people say, "Hey, I want my kids to hear another side of an argument. I want my kids to hear this. They need to know this." Come on in, and I'd be glad to have you talk to my class. But some of these people are adverse. When you follow the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, that is considered abnormal or extreme enough to make people try to tear down the Supreme Court front door like barbarians at the gate because, oh my God, we got a constitutionalist. We have to stop him. It's pretty frightening.
Wow. Yeah. So you guys are obviously doing good work, and you guys have had quite an uphill battle. But I'm sure that we will have future conversations about that and kind of delve even deeper into what you guys are doing. But for now, we're gonna move on. It is time for our look back at the weird, the inane, and the general happenings going on in the world by the crazy people who live here. News bits. News bits. Show me your bits of news. All right, so I will start it off this time. This is a story that I was almost hesitant to talk about. But as much conversation as it's brought up over the past couple days, as well as much chatter as we've had in our Facebook discussion group, I just could not let it pass by. And so we're going to talk about Elizabeth Warren and her Native American DNA. And so this article specifically is from the Washington Post. The title is Trump promised $1 million to charity if Warren proved her Native American DNA, and now he's waffling. And there's obviously no slant to this article at all. But Senator Elizabeth Warren had said she would not sit quietly as President Trump made claims about her ancestry that she called racist. On Monday morning, she released a DNA test that suggested she did have a distant Native American ancestor, and by the evening, she was using the ensuing dust-up to attack Trump. So long story short, she did this DNA test, and it found that she had Native American ancestors sometime between 6 and 10 generations back. which they did the math, and that works out to somewhere between 1 and 512 and 1 and 1024th of her is Native American. And so actually one of my favorite tweets was that Trump owes up on his promise to donate to charity, so he should donate 1,024th of $1 million to make his promise even. Have you guys been keeping up on this?
Yeah, it's a nightmare. The issue that I've had is that obviously for her to claim Native American heritage is quite absurd. The thing that I also find problematic is that Trump was asked, which for some reason he keeps being interviewed on the way to boarding a helicopter or a plane, which is super hard to hear. What he's saying, like, just hold a normal press conference like a normal person. But they'll ask him, did you say that? And he's like, no, I never said that I'd pay her $1 million. And I'm like, bro, it's on tape. You obviously said it. Just say, it'd be much better to say, well, she's still really not Native American. The tribe that she claimed won't even claim her. So that's an absurd thing to say, rather than just deny that you said it. So it's of course the same thing. Both sides are seemingly absurd here. Warren for claiming that some articles that I read said 1/64, 1/32, but up to 1 and 1024, which is pretty hilarious. And then you have Trump on the other side saying, I never said that, and then people. So it's as always an issue where both people on both sides are being completely absurd.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example of moving the goalposts, though. Kind of a little bit on both sides with Trump as well, but specifically, Senator Warren is now claiming like, "Hey, this backs up my claims." I just said that I have some ancestry somewhere that is Native American, and it's like, well, no, there's at least a dozen documented cases of her claiming Native American ancestry for specific benefits, claiming, she's in published journals. I think one I saw was from the years, every published journal from 1986 to 1995 at her alma mater has her listed as a Native American. Mm-hmm. And so in every single journal from, in that nearly 10-year time span. So this is not just, I happen to have some Native Americans somewhere. Now she's using this DNA test, and the media is using this DNA test to say, hey, she's right. She's been telling the truth the whole time. It's like, well, no, there's a big difference between, somewhere in my pinky toe, there's a little bit of Indian versus... I can, accept the benefits of being a part of this minority, having this minority status. I don't know. What do you think, Khalid?
This woman is a typical person who uses identity politics to advance career. Does what people place a lot of emphasis on. She's listed, I believe, in journals. I think she was listed as a quote, woman of color, which I found to be absolutely completely absurd. And it's there.
Khalid's cutting out a little bit.
We lost him.
And his is the next news bit too. So let's pause and see if we can get him back on.
Yeah. I will say, as we're trying to get Khalid back, is that the thing that is irritating about all this is that the right just can't accept a win. they got to exacerbate the issue. So they have to go from saying, yep, she's absurd, 1 in 1,024th Native American, to extending it to absurdities to make them look bad as well. It's like they can't just take a victory.
Hey, Khalid, we got you back? I saw his face. I thought he was back.
Nope, he is frozen. Elsa.
Ah. He says, give me a few.
Okay.
All right. So what we will do is we will shift up the order and, hey, Rob, why don't you tell us, who's bringing this podcast to everyone's lovely ears.
Sure. I can gladly do that. So this week's edition of Money and Power is, of course, sponsored by Jack Daniels. So Jack Daniels, for when you have problems, Jack Daniels can solve them. No, so this that'd be quite the.
I thought it was brought by Warren's DNA testing.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Do you need to get into college at a cheaper rate? Warren's DNA testing. They'll take care of you.
Oh man. Yeah.
To tsunami. All right. So this week's show, of course, Strikeforce Energy, the tried and true sponsor of the Money and Power podcast. 20% off all orders at strikeforceenergy.com when you use the offer code MAP. That stands for, of course, Money and Power. Here's how it works. You take one of their one aluminum pack of the most delicious tasting energy drink that you've ever had, and you add it to a half-liter 16-ounce glass if you're American, and you mix it up. That's it. No powder. There's no powder exploding all over the place like you're in an Al Pacino movie. There's a pile of blow on the table. Nothing like that. This is just liquid energy. There's no mixing, stirring, shaking. I did say stirring, but you really don't have to do that. All you do is just drop it in there. And the flavor never settles to the bottom like crystals or syrup. It's truly a force in nature. It defies the laws of physics. It really does. So it provides caffeine, taurine, potassium, B6, 12, 24, and 48. I made those last two up. Comes in lemon, orange, grape, and original flavors. So for a healthier alternative to canned energy drinks, use discount code MAP for 20% off your order at strikeforceenergy.com. Kick the can, friends. Kick the can.
Beautiful. That was a flawless delivery, and one can only assume that it is not the smart water that you're drinking, but the Strikeforce energy that is causing you to be just so eloquent this evening.
Indeed. And the interesting thing, I just got an email from Strikeforce just now. They said the ad read I just did crashed their website from all the people signing on. So that's power in advertising.
That's amazing. I just can't wait for those royalty checks to.
All the anticipatory orders are rolling in, which is nice.
It's like when your ears ring because someone's talking about you. It's like everyone's just like, someone talking about Strikeforce Energy right now? Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's that offer code. Let's go order some.
Their server fans are working overtime right now.
That's right. That's right. It's hurricanes can't stop them, but our podcast sure did.
Coming to a tagline near you. So one thing I want to talk about while we're trying to get our man back on the line is this network. So if you're listening to this on Thursday, before, what time is that call? Like 7 p.m.?
7 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, so we're doing a conference call for the Money and Power Network. So back in August, September, Jeremiah, Nathan, and myself sat down and we said, what we really want to do is create this podcast network. And through the network, really what we want to do is spread the message of legitimate conversations in faith, politics, culture, and finance, and take this information and spread it the best we can through multiple shows. And the best way that we found to do that was to create a podcast network. So currently there's the three flagship shows on the network are Rob Talks Money, Apologetics 105, and then Money and Power, which is the namesake of the network. So what we're doing Thursdays, if you listen to this on Thursday, I don't know what today is, the date. Today is nope, iPhone's still not helping me out, the 17th. So Thursday, October 18th, if you listen to this before 7 p.m., you can join the conference call. The information is on our Facebook page, facebook.com/moneypowerpod. But if you want to join the network and circumvent the call, you can look up information on that at moneypowerpod.com/network. So we're trying to take the listeners that we've accumulated in all three shows, which is nearing 50,000, and pushing those to other shows that have good messages to say that want to boost their voice through our network. So it's kind of the 10-cent pitch, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've intentionally cast kind of a wide net with the network. So we talk about faith, culture, politics, finances. And even then there's been some people, I had a guy reach out to me this week that said, I have an entrepreneurship podcast. Well, that doesn't really fit. Well, no, I think that does fit. And any, within reason, if you're having conversations, that bring about, rational discourse, good, solid conversations on a topic, whether that be business, whether that be pop culture, movies, music. There's a lot of different directions we can take this in. And, we just want, we just want you guys to join us. And so if you have an idea, maybe you don't have a podcast yet, maybe it's just an idea, come to us. We'll help you set it up. We'll help you, get started if that's what you need. Or if you have an existing podcast and you want to, bring it into the network, we would love to have that as well. So once again, that's moneypowerpod.com/network.
Yeah. And the neat thing is, so far as a network, we've crossed over 100 episodes. So all three shows in aggregate have passed 100 shows, which is a lot of hours. It's a lot of good free content, as the kids say.
Yeah, that's right. And all we ask is that you occasionally go to strikeforceenergy.com and drop like $1,000. Like it's not a big deal. All this free content. What's a couple $100 here and there?
Yeah, and it's not like you're just donating the $100 to charity. What you're doing is you're getting a great product in return. And I'll tell you this, I didn't want to go here, but if you sit on that Strike Force Energy for 10 years, I guarantee you can sell it at least a 20% margin. Guarantee. Because it's liquid gold. That's what it is. It's liquid gold.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Hey, there he is.
There he is. Welcome.
It was
back,
the Russians. It was the Russians, guys.
Very good. Well, we're still live. We're still talking. We just did our network pitch and talking about some Strike Force Energy, the liquid gold that only gets better with years. So it's like a fine wine, really.
So as we continue onto news bits, I don't think that we've ever did an ad read, sponsor read right in the middle of news bits. But hey, we roll with the punches and we move on. So hey, Khalid, what's your news bit? What are you bringing to us this evening?
Well, in light of all of this Kavanaugh madness, there's been some interesting stories over the last week that have come out where this whole thing, and again, I have 4 sisters, okay, and I don't think I need to tell anybody in this room, guys with daughters, we all love our daughters and our wives and our sisters, which is beside the point. It's about truth in a society. We have to operate on the basis of truth and fact. We have a system of rule of law, and we can't allow the mob to change that. So, in light of the Kavanaugh situation, you've had several incidents this week where people have alleged sexual assault uh, and smeared people. One guy up in upstate New York, a high school kid, lost his job. It was smeared as a sexual predator. He alleged to have exposed himself. Turns out the girls made up the story because they didn't like him. And this was in upstate New York. This was just in the past week. So the parents of the boy are suing those girls, and this was disgusting. And then a woman in Maryland, I think, accused a police officer of sexual assault, not aware that the dash cam proved her 120% liar. And her lawyer had to put it out because it was such a vile accusation. And just in New York the other day, a woman accused a 9-year-old boy of, quote, sexual assault. He walked past her in the store, which the video shows. His backpack brushed against her. He didn't even know it. And she accused him of grabbing her backside and called the cops. I mean, this hysteria this is what happens when you put all of this stuff out here. This hysteria and this whole thing about believe women. No, you follow the evidence and you look at the facts, because people use these things as a weapon. And just in the military, there's a case where a woman was just lost a judgment, and she had to pay a serviceman millions of dollars for falsely accusing him of rape. All right, this is serious business. And for people to treat it as, your word should never be enough to convict someone. If that's the case, I would probably be in jail, you know. And I don't. This is insane that people's emotions and hysteria are seeking to undermine our rule of law. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I've got a couple things to say about this. So first of all, as someone with a wife, as someone with 2 daughters, 2 sisters, as well as, a mother, grandmother, obviously, cousins, and just beyond, women that I'm really close with in my family. If someone were to do something to one of those women, if someone were to do something to my wife or to my daughters, may God have mercy on their soul, because I am probably what could be considered an extremist as it relates to rape and sexual assault. Like,
Absolutely.
if you are convicted of these crimes, like, you should be I don't know if the death penalty is a good enough treatment for you. So that being said, one of my frustrations in all of this, there have been so many people that have said similar things to what you've just said, Khalid, and have been accused of being rape apologists or some such bullcrap. It is mind-boggling that these two things cannot be true at once. In fact, someone on my Facebook said this the other day, before Kavanaugh was confirmed, that, imagine if this was your wife, imagine if this was your daughter or your sister. And it's like, yeah, if the allegations are true and that happened, that is incredibly, like, that is an issue. Absolutely. But two things can be true at once: that I can simultaneously hate rape and sexual assault, and it just be one of the most egregious, sins against humanity. And I really believe that. But I can also believe that just because someone said something, that something was done at some point, somewhere, sometime, somehow, doesn't necessarily mean that it happened. And so those two things can be true at once, and we can simultaneously, hate the sin and at the same time think that, hey, maybe we should have some evidence before, completely destroying someone's life.
Well, let me jump in real quick. I have a couple real quick. There was a pastor who thought his wife, according to what she told him, was kidnapped and raped. And he went and he murdered this person. And it turns out his wife was having an affair with this guy. This happened last year in Houston, Texas. And just
Wow.
in my neck of the woods here in East Cleveland, a woman tells another man that his daughter was raped by this gentleman. And the father goes and he shoots the guy, you know, right in my own neighborhood. He killed the guy. Turns out it was a lie. Okay. This is serious business here. And when people say, well, what if it was your daughter? Even if it was, one has to, and it's tough to be subjective in that situation.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it is. But when people are not subjective, they go off and they kill people. And it turns out someone could be manipulating you. And those are the cases that happen here. So regardless of the situation, you have to, as best you possibly can in those situations where someone tells you something, you have to be subjective, or else you end up committing murder or something for a lie. And that happens. And I think people need to understand that.
100%. And that's an issue that I have with this. So I am politically independent. I really don't belong to a party. So not that gives me a super level of judgment or an unbiased approach, but when this Kavanaugh thing came down, Kavanaugh was not my first.
You're pretty much a superhero.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like Captain Independent, except no one wants to see me in tights. So like when the Kavanaugh thing came down, like Kavanaugh wasn't my first, second, third, fourth, or fifth pick for Supreme Court justice. But what happened with him and the allegations, it seemed more politically motivated than anything, which is sad. I mean, you never want political motivations to overtake something like the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, it has in one of the most demonstrative ways that we've seen. So when this whole thing came out, I posted on Twitter. And I don't know who shared it or who retweeted it, but like within the course of like 5 days, and maybe it's Russian bots, I don't know, but I got like 1,000 followers on Twitter because I was hammering someone from CNN on what evidence this person has. And that thread has since been deleted. But the whole point was like, I'll be glad to believe her, but I need to know evidence, because if it's a personal anecdote, if you want to get anecdotal, if this happened to my son and someone accused him, I would want to know the evidence on both sides. If my daughter made a claim such as this, yes, it's an emotionally charged thing, and I'm sure it's super tough to separate yourself from that. But at the end of the day, I want to know what actually happened, because it's fair for both sides. So it's an incredibly frustrating thing when someone takes something as serious as sexual assault or abuse or violence, and they politically charge it to make it for or against one side. And one final thing I'll say is this trend that we're seeing, just from a completely statistical perspective, this trend that we're seeing of stories emerging about false convictions. I think one of the reasons that we're seeing this so much is it's because it's the right slanted, if you will, media attempting to respond by saying, look and see all of these cases that are happening. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not critiquing the right for this. But look and see all of these cases that are happening where false accusations are occurring. I think the Daily Wire posted an article that was like 50 cases that were actually turned about because someone had lied, made a false accusation. That's not a bad thing to do, but we're going to see that media spike occur because of how hard the left is coming with this believe all women should be believed mantra, when it's like we need to believe. It's kind of like what Bill Burr said. He's like, I'll believe 85% of the women, but there's 15% that'll like key your car and like wreck your house and, steal the stereo out of your car. He's like, I'll give you 85%. And I'm like,
well, you know what? This is, but see, this whole thing about believing women is why certain women do this, because they know their word is all it takes to take down a man.
For sure.
They know. There was a Uber driver who was threatened with rape by a woman on camera, because she knows that she will be believed. And this is dangerous. This is so dangerous. Where you have women who are now coached. These mail order brides who get to the United States, they are coached on how to get out of these marriages before they consummate them, and they do it by acting out domestic violence claims because they know our laws. They know the police will show up to your house. If you say you were assaulted or a victim of domestic violence, they know 5 police cars are going to show up. They are coached on how to do this. This is a fact. And it is dangerous. Duke Lacrosse, we remember that. These men were smeared with this. So whenever you try to be objective and say, well, look, let's just follow the rule here, let's follow the evidence, you are somehow demonized for actually having a rational head. People want mobocracy. They want mob rule. How dare you be rational? Let's just like they do in the old days. You grab somebody you thought was guilty, you take them out to the nearest tree, and you string them up, and you be done with it.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, with on that note, Rob, what is your news bit?
So my news bit is going to lead into the main discussion for today, and it's an article that Jeremiah had brought to my attention, and it's something that I've been talking about for a while. So if you guys recall, on last week's show, I talked about how there are certain things in the economy that make me pause when people are saying this is the strongest economy we've had in X number of years. So as someone who dabbles in economics, I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but I always hesitate when there are significant policy changes that go down without a balanced policy to help it straighten out. So, for example, anytime you implement a tax cut into the American system, because there are so much liabilities from the American government, from all of the departments, from all the employees, from all the liabilities that we've given towards Medicare and Social Security. Whenever you issue a tax cut that's going to cut federal revenue, you need to also issue something that is going to stop waste and fraud and all of these things that occur to balance out the revenue that you are no longer having. So, for example, simple terms. If I knock $500 out of my budget from an income perspective, I need to cut $500 of expenses somewhere else in my budget to adjust for the less amount of income that I have coming in. So what the government did when Trump implemented these tax cuts was they said, okay, we're going to knock $1,000 out of the federal budget for income, but they didn't clean up anything in the expenses category. They didn't do anything to eliminate expenses that would offset the lost revenue that's coming in. So this article is very recent, came out yesterday. It's from NPR. It says federal deficit jumps 17% as tax cuts eat into government revenue. Now this is something that I said was going to happen from moment one. If you don't fix this by cutting military spending or national defense or starting to work on trimming down departments, the federal deficit is going to jump, the national debt is going to jump, and both of those things have occurred. So a couple of things, federal deficit ballooned to almost $800 billion, and there's really been nothing put in place to fix that. Now, obviously, corporate tax collections, the article notes, has fallen 31%, which makes sense because the corporate tax rate went from 35 to 21. So these are all things that we knew were going to occur. The problem is we haven't really done enough on the backside to say these are the expenses that we're going to cut out to offset the loss of revenue. So I agree with the left, which is odd because the left is a spending machine, as is the right. There's really no conservative party anymore. I'll be quite honest. Everyone seems to be quite happy with running up the deficit and the budget. And just for terms, when I speak of a deficit, I'm talking about an annual budget, and when I speak of the national debt, I'm talking about the total debt on the books for the government in aggregate. So just so you know, for going forward, 'cause I'm going to be doing a bit of a monologue on this in a bit, another monologue, if you will. So I guess I'll pause there and I'll get your guys' opinion. What do you think about the just from a micro perspective of the federal deficit jumping up 17% due to these tax cuts?
I think that this is a perfect example of perspective on this, because the left looks at this and they say hypocrisy, or you're giving tax breaks to your best friends. Meanwhile, the thing that you didn't want to happen, which is deficits, is happening, and people on the right are praising the tax cuts, but seemingly ignoring the deficits. And my thing is this: yes, if you fix one side and not the other, there's going to be problems. But in the short term, that doesn't mean that the initial action was a bad thing. In other words, I would not. For me, this is not an excuse to. This is not an excuse not to have the tax cuts, because we've already seen where it's spurred economic growth, where it's created jobs, or I should say, provided the climate for creating jobs.
Yeah,
and so there's been benefits to this in the economy. While there's obviously there are negatives as it relates to the deficit, but it's kind of a both and for me. Yes, we have to do both, but the fact that we're taking this step, or the fact that this step made a negative repercussion in the deficit, is not an immediate reason to not have done the first step in the first place. We've got to start somewhere. That's kind of my initial thoughts.
Let me jump in real quick before we throw it to our special guest here. Do you think, though, and this is my perspective, I agree the tax cuts are a good thing, but do you think that there should have been a counterbalance policy implemented along with the tax cut to say, okay, we're going to cut spending in this area as we reduce tax cuts? Don't you think there should have been a joint effort or a joint bill that addressed both areas?
I mean, maybe we can. I mean, we can talk about utopia, but Congress is not such a thing. And that's kind of where I'm at in this. Is it's like at some level, I just have to welcome what we get, and this is what we've got so far. There are people in Congress, Ohio's own Congressman Jim Jordan of the Freedom Caucus, who is pushing for pushing against a lot of the spending that's going on. The Freedom Caucus was one of the only groups of Republicans that voted against some of the omnibus bills, for these very reasons. And so there is moves in that direction from certain caucuses, but I mean, yeah, there comes a point where we just have to say, okay, this is what we can get right now. Let's do this piecemeal if we have to, because if we're waiting for a perfect piece of legislation that cuts all of the wasteful spending, meanwhile preserving the spending that we like, meanwhile cutting taxes to record lows, it's not going to happen. And so, or at least, I mean, hey, I'm hopeful, but I don't see it happening. So to answer your question, yes, it should have come with spending cuts, but the fact that it doesn't negate the tax cuts to begin with. Khalid?
Well, I'll tell you this. A lot of the wasteful spending that takes place won't go away anytime soon when these guys' reelections depend on it. They have to deliver some bacon back home, or else they don't get reelected. We know that. And if you look at this, I shared with you all earlier a list from a great website called openthebooks.org, where it has some of the most unbelievable waste from government, things they spend money on. We all know about the crab on the treadmill. That's one of the most egregious examples of government. But the millions of dollars that they spend just to keep their jobs, I think that is a problem. And what doesn't make me optimistic is I went to a speech. I met a guy that used to work on the Capitol Hill on budget issues, and they tried to get a $300 million budget item removed from the budget, uh, and they called it the "I'll Google that" bill. Why? Because this government agency printed out pamphlets that you could get for free online. So they had all these people employed, and they printed out these booklets, and it was free information online.
Yeah.
And they could not get rid of that budget item. Why? Because it represented jobs in someone's district. And this is why the budget will never change, because everybody thinks their $100 million is not a big deal. When 100, two or 3,000 other people have $100 million budget item that they don't think it's a big deal. Like, why are we funding the arts? Why is the government funding NPR? Why is the government funding Amtrak? This represents jobs. It represents a paycheck for someone, and it won't go away. I'm an extremist when it comes to this kind of thing. I would like to see, there was a CEO back in the 80s called Chainsaw Al Dunlap, who was known for, like, you remember him? He was known for cutting like everything, you know. I mean, he cut everything, and to bring the books back into balance for his corporation. I would be lobbing off pieces of this government. I think the Department of Energy should go. It's only was created under Jimmy Carter. I think the Department of Education should go. That's another agency Carter created. The Department of Commerce. I mean, all these things should be lobbed off. And of course, entitlement reform. Unless you do something really kind of on the extreme side, this government is going to continue to.
But the problem with that, and this is something that I've been like Ron Paul is one of my all time favorite people. But the thing that makes me laugh when I hear Ron Paul talk is he's like, I got 5 agencies that I'm going to knock out, and he's like, these are the ones that are going first 100 days, and just from a logistical perspective, it's just impossible. There are so many tie-ins between local, state, and federal governments and all of those agencies. Take the Department of Education for one. You can start to reduce it, and that's something that we should do for certain agencies that we deem unnecessary or that can be fulfilled at a state level. But and I know this isn't what you're suggesting, but we can't just go in there and say, all right, Department of Education, you're closed January 1st. Because it would cause such a systemic issue that we really can't even see. It's outside of the realms of utilitarianism, because we can't even see the impacts and the things that this particular problem would address. So it's really something that is so scaled and needs to be measured that there's so much tied into our government and how our revenue is spent and what department touches what state and local official or government. It's a mess.
Well, I sort of have a slight disagreement on the education system, because each president of the last 3 or 4 have increased the education budget. Mm-hmm. You're feeding the beast. This very useless agency. Education has not improved since we had a Department of Education for 30 years. I think it was, again, created in late 1970s.
Yeah.
People managed to get out of high school and be literate without the Department of Education. Now we can't live without it. But I think that this won't happen. I agree with you. But drying up the money and then keep increasing the education budget, it's a scam. The education budget has been fattened up so much where you have these for-profit colleges that we see on these late-night TV commercials that are promising you a career in healthcare and criminal justice, and you can't get a job because these people are taking government money, creating these colleges and storefronts, and everybody applauds whenever you say you fund education. But nobody ever asks, well, where's this money going? It's a scam. It's like, hey, the government rains down money, and you could expect a scam. The government largesse is responsible for the housing crisis. It's responsible for the education crisis. It's responsible for the post office being broke. Mm-hmm. It's responsible for college education costs going out of control.
Absolutely. These
people are out of control. So if you go back to the Constitution, the 10th Amendment says all powers not listed in this Constitution or prohibited by it were left to the states.
Yep.
And it's a simple matter of the government should not be in things it should not be in. And no one has held their feet to the fire about what they're supposed to be doing, which is why most of the people in Congress have never read the Constitution. Only people who are speaking out about it are people like Mike Lee and Ron Paul, your guy Ron Paul.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So with that, let me say one thing, and then I'll pass it to you, Rob, to kind of segue into our main topic. We've already delved into it a little bit already, but
I'm getting some tremendous wind noise. It sounds awesome, actually.
So Khalid has a tornado going through his room, but it has passed.
Sorry about that.
But
It's all good.
it's all good. So here's my issue with this as a whole, and that is that we've already touched on it a little bit. Everyone has their sacred cows as it relates to spending, as it relates to government programs, and so it is nearly impossible, if not impossible, to cut anything without someone saying, well, my grandma used that program once 20 years ago and it helped her, with her bunions, and it was a necessary, that's a necessary, funding item. There's nothing that you could go down the line. And, Khalid, you have this list of ridiculous studies, $1 million for testing how far a crab can run on a treadmill, $1 million for,
Yes, sir.
for fleas on a dog, $1 million for this study, $10 million for this study, ridiculous waste. But you cut those line items and someone's going to say, but look at the jobs it's creating.
Yeah.
Look, funding, as it relates to education, funding the education system, Social Security, Medicare, military spending. Listen, I'm a veteran. I'm a defense hawk. I'm all about securing a national defense. Frankly, that's one of the only things that our federal government is actually tasked with doing is defense. So yeah, I am going to be a little bit bullish on that. But even then, that's not to say that there aren't places to cut within defense spending. But the problem is that the way it's been done, it cuts the wrong things. It actually cuts support for warfighters and not actually cutting, ridiculous contracts, not cutting research and development on projects that are, 20 years too late and $1 billion over budget, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are places to cut even within, necessary functions that don't negate those necessary functions. But because everyone has their pet peeves, everyone has their sacred cows, it seems like just an insurmountable thing. And you have issues where people are trying to pass a budget, and if you look at any quote unquote cuts, any budget cuts over the last, let's say, 20 years, they're not actual cuts. They're cuts to the increase in a yearly budget. And so they say, we're going to increase the budget this many millions of dollars or billions of dollars. And then if Republicans say anything, they say, well, instead of this many millions of dollars, let's only increase it this many millions of dollars. And they are vilified. Like, these are evil people. They're cutting education. They're cutting our veterans. They're cutting Social Security. They're cutting support for our elderly. They're cutting healthcare. They're cutting everything. It's like, no, they're cutting an increase to the budget on a yearly basis. It's not even a cut. It's a maybe not this much increase. And so it's a problem. I don't really know where to go from here. But it's one of the reasons that our debt has ballooned to the place it has right now. And so with that, I will quit pontificating and I will pass it to you, Rob. Why don't you get us into our main topic?
Sure. So this is something, we've obviously discussed a lot, and this is something that I know for the listeners, this is a hot topic. What's interesting, every presidential race, apart from Trump versus Hillary, centered upon the national debt. Now, there was really very little talk about the national debt in this last election because there were so many character-related issues that people were discussing. But the focus on the national debt has been a staple in elected officials since the beginning of our country. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break this down into two different ways. I'm going to talk about the origin of our national debt, and then I'm going to talk about the causation that has led it to be so high. And there are a few things that people say in this conversation that are kind of irritating, because what government officials and politicians are extremely good at doing is taking a very complicated topic and boiling it down to talking points that really don't pan out once you look into it. So people will say things like, well, China owns us. No, they don't. Like, if you look at the numbers, China definitely does not own us. I mean, from any type of financial perspective that you can look at, there's just no data that bears that out. And we can talk about that more. Maybe I'll do it on another show. Other things that people say is we are completely broke. Also not true. We have a tremendous amount of debt, but the country is, if you're defining broke as no money, not true. And then also it says we don't have enough money to fund our future promises. This is something that I'm going to talk about more at the end, but this is kind of like me saying, Jeremiah, how many kids do you have, Jeremiah? 5? 4. So that's like me saying, do you have enough money to pay for all your kids to go to school right now? Right, because it's hundreds of thousands of dollars probably. So that's like me saying, well, from a financial perspective, Jeremiah, even though your kids are all under 5, you don't really have enough money to fund these future promises. It's like, well, we haven't really got there yet, so why don't we pump the brakes a little bit, you know? So elements of these things very well may be true. But what I want to do here is I want to attempt to break this discussion down and talk about, again, those two primary branches. So let me just take a couple minutes and break this down. So the United States, as all good stories do, started out in a pile of debt. From the Revolutionary War, lack of organization, taxation planning, tariff planning, imports and exports, and then the impact of that Revolutionary War led to our national debt very early on. So basically right from moment one in 1790, there was a significant amount of debt for a country being so young. But what happened was through a series of budget surpluses over the next 40 years, the United States government was actually debt-free for the first and last time from the period of 1835 to 1836. Like all events in American history, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, all obviously spiked the debt. And the Civil War brought in a new wave of debt that the government had not yet dealt with, as the government debt went from $65 million in 1860 to over $1 billion in 1863. So in just 3 years, the national debt 12x'd, which is pretty amazing. So following the years of the Civil War, and this is back when a really interesting thing occurred. After the Civil War, the government was very focused on making sure there was a budget surplus. So for 36 out of 47 years following the Civil War, there was a budget surplus, which led to the government paying off for 55% of the national debt. So yes, it can be done. But World War I and World War II obviously caused great spikes in the national debt, followed by Korea and Vietnam. So I'm not going to get into the whole history of the debt and the rises and falls, but I do want to highlight a few administrations and their impact on the debt. So the first one of note, we can talk about Carter and the unemployment and like the the death percentage, unemployment with inflation, and how the 70s were quite volatile time, but there's actually a lot of extenuating circumstances and a lot of external factors that led to that. I do place some blame on Carter, but really I want to focus on Reagan. Reagan was the first person who really came out and had this open policy that reduced taxes and increased military spending. And this caused a huge spike in our national debt because there was no offsetting principles or offsetting pieces of legislation, rather, that balanced our budget. So we had several deficits in the 80s due to Reagan, and HW followed suit. And then Clinton did something quite interesting. He decided to raise taxes slightly in, I think, 93, 94, and 97, and also lowered our military spending, which between him and Newt. gave us a budget surplus and actually drove the public debt percentage down from 49% of our national debt down to 33% over the course of just 4 years, which say what you will about Clinton, that's a pretty amazing feat, and one that I highlight out of the Clinton administration is something that he did that I thought was quite meaningful. So as it stands right now, the government is about $21.6 trillion in debt, and here's the breakdown. 33% of our debt is from foreign governments. China and Japan are the largest, and China owns about 1.4 trillion. Japan is about 1.2 trillion. Now, 1.4 trillion is not enough to have the U.S. government by the balls, so to speak. It's just a small amount of money relatively to the capital that we bring in. 29% of our national debt is called intergovernmental debt, which is debt that's owned by the government. Now, this is confusing as hell. So if you want to really dive into intergovernmental debt, I encourage you to pour yourself a little bourbon, add a little squirt, and really get ready for a good time. So basically, it's money that's borrowed and passed back and forth between the Treasury and different governmental branches that spend over what their allocated budgets are. 13% is state and local governments owning debt, which is very interesting if you think about the logistics of that. 13% is the Federal Reserve. Of note, the Federal Reserve is the single largest holder of U.S. government debt. And 12% is the good old American public and businesses. So this would be student loans, accumulated public debt, and the like. And that weighs in at 12%, and that gets you to 100% if my math is right, which most of the time it is. So that's a lot. That's a lot of information in a few minutes, but really you can see just from these last 4 or 5 minutes that this conversation on what to do about the national debt is very interwoven. There's a lot of problems going on, and the solutions that we're offering aren't comprehensive enough to tackle the areas that it needs to. And I agree with what you said earlier, Jeremiah, is that we really can't just say, okay, we need to have this perfect policy that addresses everything. We need to just start chipping away. But the problem is we're not even trying that. We're not even doing, all right, we're just going to start chipping away. Instead, we're just like, all right, we're going to jump the deficit up 17% and not really propose anything that's going to lower the deficit and actually put us into a surplus. 2 other areas of note, excuse me. So there are other things that are classified as non-government debt that are of note. Federal employee retirement benefits and accounts payable, that weighs in at about 9.2 trillion. Future SSI, which is about 31 trillion, and Medicare obligations are about 35 trillion. Now, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier with the analogy of Jeremiah being asked to fund his kids' college now when it's not really the point in time to do that. And this is kind of how I treat these future obligations. I'm not going to count them against the debt because it's money that hasn't been, really been put into the intake system yet. Yes, these are things that are promised, but it's not things that are promised to be paid right now. And the last thing is a few fun facts. So for the national debt, about $65,000 per person. That's every child and adult in America. If every person chipped in $65K each, we would have no national debt. It's $171,000 per household. It makes up 106% of our gross domestic product. And it's 623% of our annual revenue. So we're killing it. So I guess my thoughts or my question for you is what do you think about all that?
So first of all, just with those numbers of 65,000 per person, I know it said, like 170,000 per household. But if you did it per person, because we have an above average, family number in our family, that would be a cool $390,000 for me, my wife, and 4 kids, and that would be $585,000 for Nathan and his wife and 7 kids. So
it's doable. That's what you're saying.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yes.
So yeah, my wife and I currently rent a home, and we've talked about buying. I'm just going to have to tell her that we can either pay off our debt, our country's debts, or we can buy a massive mansion. So, it's, can't do both.
Are you a true patriot? You're going to pay off the debt. We all know.
Yeah.
It's
like,
absurd.
Even the number, I mean, 65,000, you're like, oh, well, compared to a lot of people's student loans, that's not too much. But then, when you think of like that also applies to like babies and toddlers. That's not just working Americans, or Americans with income. So yeah, I mean, it's a problem. I think we've already said it. It's a bipartisan problem. Everyone increases spending, and yeah, I mean, it's a problem. But my question kind of goes to your, to the conversation earlier about, cutting out whole agencies. It might not be possible, or it might not be probable, but at what point do we look at it and say, hey, even if it's difficult, maybe it's needed. Maybe we do need to just cut off large chunks of the government. I mean, at what point, here's my thing. Like, there's a lot of projections as to what point this becomes unsustainable. I mean, what's your thought on that? When does this become unsustainable?
Well, let me address the first thing that you said, because I want to make sure that I'm clear on my position for eliminating government agencies. I think it can be done. My issue with the American political system as it stands right now is that the proposals that people are offering are completely absurd. No one is saying, here's a 5-year exit strategy, or better yet, a 4-year exit strategy for a new administration, to say, this is how we're going to phase out the Department of Commerce. And here's where all the roles and responsibility are going to flip to. And here's what we're going to do each year. And this is what we're going to do. No one has done that. Everyone is saying, we're just going to cut the Department of Commerce out. And there hasn't been a detailed exit strategy as a part of any serious campaign to do such a thing. Instead, it's just the rhetoric that we get. So yes, we can do it and we should do it, but it's getting the right person in there who's actually going to follow through and do it. And let's face it, it's not a sexy topic when you're talking about things to discuss in the campaign trail. No one is going to get all fired up and support someone whose sole issue is eliminating the government debt. There's a lot of other social factors that are going to plague a candidate, rather than just talking about debt and exit strategies for government agencies.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And having worked on campaigns and been around a lot of campaigns, I mean, one of the things that always comes up in town halls and question and answer sessions is voters ask candidates, they don't always say it like this, but essentially it comes down to, what are you going to do for me? And those promises don't come without strings attached. You cannot say, well, I'm going to do this, 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 and this for my constituents. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be free. Oh, and by the way, it's actually going to reduce our debt and deficit. So, for me, this comes down to, like many issues, there's root causes and there's root problems.
Yeah.
And I think we can talk about how it came to be and who's at fault, and maybe even who's more at fault, Republicans or Democrats.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it comes down to, it's a cultural problem that, like I said before, everyone has their sacred cows. No one is willing to understand that there may need to be cuts that are done. And it may end up, putting a little bit of pressure on me as an individual, as a voter, because, maybe instead of getting, $12,000 back in my taxes at the end of the year, maybe I only get back $8,000, or maybe I don't get the, whatever benefit it is that I need, throughout the year.
Yeah.
The problem is that it's an issue that very quickly becomes personal.
Yep.
to every individual when you talk about it, because either it's going to negatively affect me or my family or someone I know very, very quickly. And frankly, on the trajectory that we're at, there's no other way to do it. I mean, we've got to start taking chunks away.
Yeah, let me jump in here. And sorry, I kind of fade out a bit. My phone keeps overheating. I want to challenge Rob on a couple of things here. First of all, when you look at the budget, obviously Congress controls the purse strings. The president obviously is going to get credit. He's going to get blame. But Congress, whoever controls Congress, is controlling the purse strings. And if you look at, for instance, the Clinton administration, he had a Republican Congress who acted like Republicans for a change, because they actually forced him into reforming welfare, which he vetoed twice. He didn't want to do that.
Right.
And he wanted defense cuts, so he got defense cuts as a compromise. He gave them tax cuts. And he also was warned, if you veto welfare reform a third time, you're not going to get reelected. So he kind of, and that's what the president's supposed to do. You're supposed to compromise.
Yeah.
They both compromise. Now, there was a budget, there was a projected surplus. Not a surplus, it was a projected surplus. For instance, if your house note and your car note are wiped out right now, you could project out, okay, I have an extra, $1,500 a month in my budget for the next year. Well, until your water heater breaks down, or until, you have a flood on your basement floor, and then that surplus kind of goes away. So there was a projected surplus. Number two, as far as future obligations, the analogy that you used, I think that's a little problematic in the sense that Jeremiah's children are very young. Okay. He doesn't have a 16-year-old who's ready to go off to college next year. Well, we have people retiring every single year.
Yep.
Baby boomers, millions of them. And we owe them money like now. Because when someone is 65 and they're ready to retire next year, they're owed money now. And we don't have that money. So this intergovernmental debt, we know we're taking money from one department, replacing it with an IOU, and then that's how it's like the shell game. We're moving money around.
Let me pause you there, just because I don't want to talk in massive paragraphs and then miss responding to what you're saying. So let me stop you there just for a second if I can. So a projected surplus in the 90s. Fine. I agree 100%. The thing about Social Security or Medicaid is that those are budgeted items in the United States, or Congress budget every year. So it's not as though the entirety of what we're planning for Social Security and Medicaid is coming out of debt dollars, if you will. Those are planned line items in our national budget every year. Do they go up? Yes. Do we supplement with debt? Of course. But of course there's no perfect analogy, but there is a plan in our budget every year to take the revenue that we make and circulate that back to people through Social Security and Medicaid. So it's not perfect. Obviously we owe people money, and we'll continue to do so in the long game, but it's not as though the entire amount of Social Security and Medicaid is being brought about through debt dollars, if you will.
No, I never made that point.
Okay.
I'm saying that these programs are so you got, for instance, the pension benefit guarantee, administration. So we have pensions, we have Social Security, we have Medicaid, Medicare. We owe a lot of money to ourselves, and which is why I think some people want an influx of. I don't want to get off on this topic, but some people want an influx of immigration. Because our numbers, we're not producing enough children to pay into the safety nets in the future. I'm sure you know that.
Yep.
And that's a problem that most of the world is having. We're having the same problem. And I think the people who know these numbers know that. And they want people to come into the system, pay into the system, because they know that we need money to pay our citizens when they begin to retire. I think something like 70 million baby boomers are scheduled to be on the system, within the next few years. And every year we're getting certain numbers of people who are retiring. Yeah. I'm just saying that we actually need to start looking at lobbing off pieces of this government that we can lob off because we can't carry this load 20 years into the future. I don't think it's going to sustain itself.
I agree. And that's one thing that is very difficult to project. And I've seen even the best economists not have a detailed year or even a time frame of when it's going to be unsustainable, just because of the system that we've put in place. But it's definitely something that we need to be actively pursuing, and that was my point earlier, is that we're not really doing anything to actively pursue an exit strategy for some of these unnecessary departments that we can very easily revert back to the states' rights.
Right.
You know, it's not something that any politician is actively campaigning on, and that was something that, you know, Jay was saying, was that because it's not an overly sexy topic, and it's because people want things for themselves when they are electing government officials, which is a very poopy way to look at it.
Yeah, and education is one of these things that you're not allowed to challenge.
Right.
You know, you have these things when you mention education, you get a standing ovation, even no matter how nonsensical it is. If you say education, and people stand up and clap.
Yeah.
It's like, because it's always a good idea to throw money at education. Never is enough. If you say I'm going to commit $100 billion to education budget, people will lose their minds and throw confetti in the air, because it's always a good idea in their minds.
So with that, we're going to press on. Listen, guys, I really appreciate the conversation on this. This is going to be an ongoing discussion. We're going to talk about in future episodes. We will likely talk about different facets of our debt and deficit and moving on. But it's a massive problem. Unfortunately, I was expecting that in a half-hour conversation we could solve it all, but it looks like we only solved about half of it. So we'll have to continue the conversation. But moving on, I want to introduce some feedback that we've gotten. As always, our listeners can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Money Power Pod. You can join our Facebook discussion group by going to moneypowerpod.com/group, and that will forward you to the private Facebook group. Just ask to be let in, and we will let you in, and you can join in on the conversations. We would love to have you there. We always have a lot of riveting conversations there on various topics. We already talked about it earlier, but there's been a lot of Elizabeth Warren memes being dropped in there by some of our listeners. So it's always fun stuff. But one piece of feedback I did want to point to specifically is that in September we offered a giveaway, or we had a contest that anyone who joined our Facebook group and followed the instructions in the group, which was to leave a review on iTunes or on Facebook, and drop a screenshot into the group. Anyone who did that would be entered into a drawing, and we drew those winners. And Tony Vance and Kevin Small won that September giveaway. So we sent them a prize pack that consisted of some comedy DVDs from Tim Hawkins, as well as a Strikeforce Energy sample pack. And so Tony Vance, for one, he received his, and he said, "Thanks, MAP. I will laugh and keep laughing long into the night, thanks to Strikeforce Energy." And so we appreciate the feedback, Tony, Kevin. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you guys entering our contest. And I did want to introduce one other thing. We are going to have a contest. Our next contest is going to be for the remainder of October and through November. We, in addition to the platforms that we've been on, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, many of the others, where you can find this podcast, and wherever you're listening to the podcast right now. We started a YouTube channel, and I've started adding slowly getting the back catalog of our episodes onto YouTube, so it's just audio, but they can be listened to on YouTube. And we will be caught up there pretty soon. But with the new channel, come certain restrictions, and they will only let us change the username once we hit 100 subscribers. So that's kind of our initial stretch goal, is to get to 100 subscribers on YouTube. And so for the remainder of October and through November, so ending the last day in November, we're going to be giving away some prize packs to be announced, but some fun things along the way. Every time we hit 20 or 25 new subscribers, we'll do a drawing. We'll do some fun things along the way. Because the channel has a crazy long username, I made a short link. So if you go to moneypowerpod.com/YouTube, it will link you directly to our YouTube channel. We would love it if you would subscribe there. All you have to do is subscribe, and when we do drawings, anyone who's subscribed will be entered into the drawings along the way. So once again, you can follow us on @MoneyPowerPod on all socials, and go to moneypowerpod.com/YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can gain some visibility there. And ultimately, once we hit 100 subscribers, we'll be able to change our username. So thank you, everyone who listened. Thanks to everyone who's joined us in the Facebook group, and we really appreciate it. And with that, we are coming to the bittersweet portion of the show, and that is where we get to offer our last bit of advice or recommendations or rants or pet peeves, but it also means that it is the end of the show. And so with that, parting shots. All right, Rob, what do you got?
So I want to make a recommendation on something that I watched. It was probably like 10 days ago. I think it came out. It came out right when I got back from my trip. It was Joe Rogan's new comedy special called Strange Times. So Rogan does get a bit vulgar at times, but his comedy special this time is on point. Discusses a lot of timely topics. And if you listen to the show, you know Rogan's one of my favorite podcasters. So his comedy special is great. He makes fun of everybody equally, which is nice. And I do think that it's his best special, best 1 hour bit that he's done. And he's really evolved as a comedian, and he's moving up into one of my favorites. He's almost in the top 10. So check that out. It's on Netflix. Joe Rogan, Strange Times. And don't at me because of the language. Stop. It's fine. Just deal with it.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. No one's forcing them to watch. It's just a recommendation.
Yeah.
You know, you did your due diligence. You said, hey, there's some language, but people know what to expect with Joe Rogan. And if you don't, you've been warned.
Well, I recommended Dave Chappelle to someone, and they're like, boy, I didn't think he'd curse so much. I'm like, it's Dave Chappelle. Are you kidding me?
All you have to do is just Google Dave Chappelle. I'm pretty sure that you'll find out.
It's not Red Skelton.
Or Charlie Chaplin as Tony Vance's favorite comedians. But no, that's good. I've seen the comedy special. It's funny. I was logging into Netflix a couple weeks back, and it showed up on the home screen, and I was like, so ended up watching it. And my first thought was, I'm gonna watch this before Rob. And then I sent it to you the next day. I said, hey, listen to this or watch this special. It's really good. And you're like, oh yeah, I watched it 2 nights ago. I'm like, dang it. I thought it'd just shown up, but
I watched it right when it dropped. So it was like 3 in the morning.
Yeah. So no, I watched it and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. So solid recommendation. So, Khalid, what's your parting shot?
Well, I guess you can call this a bit of a rant. People who know me know what contempt I have for mainstream media. I think that many of them are just pretty faces who can read well, and they get on television and they read stuff. And I think that the media calling anyone divisive is like Mike Tyson accuses someone of having a short temper. Um, they are the most divisive. I think Trump talks about the media a little too much, but at the same time, he's right about them. And I'm talking about the what he calls fake news. Uh, I read 99% of my news. I really don't watch TV news, but these people are so dishonest and so corrupt. I'll give you an example. There was this woman in Maryland who accused the police officer of sexually assaulting her. So the headline reads, "Woman falsely accuses police officer of, sexual assault," until the dash cam comes out. Okay, fine. Well, what they do is, if the person was a white female, it would have been white woman accuses black police officer of sexual assault. Now, that in itself is what they do in the media, and that tells you right there it's a racial incident, and therefore people jump sides right away. And it's in the headline. If you look at any headline where there's a perceived, whether it's real or not, a black victim, the perpetrator's race, if they're white, will be in the headline. If the victim is white and the perpetrator is black, you will not know what color the person is. And this media does this for the very reason why they sensationalize certain stories and they have people at each other's throats. I have an article which I think anybody should read. I wrote it 3 years ago. It's called "The Legend of the Unarmed White Man." And what these stories are, I don't know if I've seen it to you, Jeremiah, where I just highlighted a bunch of stories where white men were shot by police and no one knows these guys' names. Many of them are right here in Ohio. And I've watched people read it with their mouths open. And I tell them, this is your national media that does this, because they give you things that are sensational, that gets people's emotions and up in a tizzy, and it gets us at each other's throats, because if you see this constantly on television and you're fed this, it gives you a narrative. But the bottom line is there are bad things that happen, and I think automatically it becomes racial when you constantly feed people these stories. And there are people right here in Ohio who have questionable deaths by the police. There are people all over the country, and I wrote these stories. Even some of them are remarkably similar to, for instance, the Trayvon Martin story. In the same state, same scenario, black man acquitted for shooting a white kid in the face over allegedly breaking in cars. And nobody knows this guy's name because the national media has no interest. So that's my point of just the television and the national media are dangerous in many cases, and they are responsible for sowing a lot of this discourse that we have. They sit back and watch as idle bystanders while they've thrown plenty of rocks and they hide their hands. So that's my issue. And everybody who knows me knows what contempt I have for these people, who I don't think are as bright as people give them credit for. They're pretty faces. They can read news well, and some of them wear nice looking glasses.
I need to get pretty. I need to wear glasses, and I need to be able to read real good, and then I can be on the news. I need to talk real good too. That's really important as well.
I was gonna say you're almost there, Rob, but
you could be the next. You could be the next Wolf Blitzer.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, my wife often compliments me and tells me I have a face for radio, so that's really nice.
Guys, very good. So my parting shot to close us off here. I actually don't know. So this is a recommendation. I don't know how I originally heard of this guy. I followed him on Twitter, or he followed me on Twitter or something. But there's a podcaster, an Irish man by the name of Jonathan Dunn, who's a part of the Blaze podcast network. And he's a podcaster and contributor to the Blaze. I started listening because he followed me on social media. I started listening to his podcast, And he's got some really good stuff. He talks about first principles. He talks about kind of the principles that our country was founded on. And he's an Irishman. He is not a United States citizen. He's been trying to get his citizenship for a while, but he's kind of like an outsider looking in, and and able to kind of sift through the craziness that often happens, because he's able to put it in perspective and say, hey, most governments are not like this. Our governments are not like this. But the United States has something special. And so he's at Freedom Disciple on Twitter. And his name's Jonathan Dunn. Solid. He's got a great accent. So in fact, his tagline for the podcast is people come for the accent and they stay for the principles. And so I really appreciate his take on a lot of things. It's good stuff. I'd encourage people to take a listen. It drops every Saturday at noon. But the main thing is too, I was telling him about our podcast network, and he actually gave us a shout out on Facebook and Twitter, and encouraged people to check out the Money and Power podcast network, and for people with new shows or people who might want to start podcasting to join the network. And so just a stand-up guy and a good podcast and good content. So just wanted to give a quick shout out to Jonathan Dunn, who's you can find him at Freedom Disciple. And that is my parting shot. And with that, gentlemen, we have come to the end of the show. I really appreciate Khalid. I really appreciate you coming on the show, taking the time late this Wednesday evening. We hope to have you on again sometime. It's really, I thought it was a fruitful discussion, and for our listeners out there, let us know what you thought. But for Rob, for Khalid, and for Nathan, who will hopefully be back next week to get this train back on the tracks, this has been Money and Power. Good night and good luck.
Well, I got the money and the power. Yeah. Once you get a little, they just want to take you down, cuz we've been going hard for too long. Can't get enough, what is you on?